So this is history of the English language course, which is taught in the third year of philology, linguistics, English language, and the fourth year, English language and literature students. I'm Zubaydullo Rasulov, a Doctor of Science of English Linguistics Department. And the first lecture is introduction, and here it should be mentioned about the influences at work on language. So what kind of language is there? What kind of subject is history of the English language? This is the subject which unites all the theoretical subjects which are taught for the course of philology, linguistics and English language and history. These subjects contains the integration of theory of linguistics, introduction to linguistics, general linguistics, theoretical grammar and theoretical phonetics, lexicology, introduction to German philology, and different other subjects. That is why, in order to be aware of the history of the English language, one should have enough knowledge on the subjects which is mentioned above. The first topic of the lecture is history of the English language, a cultural subject. Here it is worth to mention about how language is closely related with the culture of the people who are speaking that language. They are closely related. We cannot investigate on language without being aware of how it is related to culture. You want to understand the language itself, you have to be aware of the culture of that people because they are closely related. Some aspects of linguistic matters cannot be explained without its relation to culture. So any educated person must be aware of the history of the language which he is going to study, which he is investigating. It's not to be explained that everyone should be a philologist or a linguist, but brief knowledge on the history of the language which is being studied is very important in order to have a clear idea what we are delivering to the learners as going to be teachers of the English language on the one hand. On the other hand, the scientists who are going to investigate the English language. So diversity of cultures that find expression in it is a reminder that history of the English language, a story of contact during the past 1,500 years. It understates matters to say that political, social, cultural forces, influences at work on language. In order to have a clear idea why there is a necessity to investigate the history of the English language, let's go back to the English language which had been spoken about 1,500 years ago. The sources, what we have on Old English, the English language, the period of the English language, which is called the earliest period, is mostly from Beowulf. Let's listen and try to read the text on Old English.
Hwetwe gardena in jardagum, feud kuninga frymje frunon, hutha edelinga sellen fremedon. Oft skjuld shaving sjaldena thratum, monigum meithum meldo settla of teach, eizo de erlas, sithan erft werth verschaft funde. Heithas frovre je bad, weeks under woknum werth myndum thach, of that him eigwilch thara sitendra, over hron rade hyran sjode, gomban judan, that was good kuning. Dem elvera was efterkände jungen hjärdum, tonne God sende folket och frovre, fyren terve onjär, that he drugon alder läse lange skile. Him thess liv frau, wuldres weldend, worldare forjäv, Beowulf west breme, blad weede sprang, skyldes evera skedelandum in, Swa shall young guma go to your weirchan, from fel hiptem on ferrer bear me, that hine un ulde efter wunigen will you see that, funny we come laud ye lasten, luft shell in maitha hiware manyathe.
So you see, the Old English, which we think that it is English, actually is unfamiliar for us to understand. That is worthy of study. The questions of today's lecture consist of the following: the history of the English language and cultural subject, influences at work on language, growth and decay, principles of Indo-European family, discovery of Sanskrit, and Grimm's law. So we mentioned that the history of the English language includes history of 1,500 years of its development. And here it is worth to mention what kind of cultures impacted on development of the English language from its earliest period. That is Roman Christianizing, which was introduced Britain was introduced by Roman Christianizing in the beginning of our era, that is somewhere in the 1st century AD, which lasted until the 4th century AD, as a result of which the linguistic situation on the land is impacted by the Roman Christianizing, that is by the Latin language. Another impact on the development of the English language had the Scandinavian invasion of the 9th century because of the interrelation between two languages, the English language and Scandinavian languages. A lot of Scandinavian borrowings appeared in the structure of the English language, and to understand the nature of those borrowings, it is worth to mention about Scandinavians, their language, their culture, and their impact on the English language and its development. The other impact, which is much noticeable on the history of the English language, that changed the direction of the English language from synthetic into analytic, it was Norman conquest of the 12th century. The scientists believe that in comparison with the other cultures, Roman culture had more impact because of it belonged to the other group of languages of Indo-European, unlike the other impacts on the history of the English language. Moreover, English, like all other languages, is a subject to the constant growth and decay. In the structure of the English language, no matter which level it is, whether it is phonetic, lexical, or grammatical structure, in all layers it is noticeable to observe several changes, no matter whether the other cultures impacted the history of the English language. For example, in lexical level, nice in Shakespeare's day meant foolish, unlike in modern period, or rheumatism signified a cold in the hand, which had changed its semantic meaning. Another word is on grammar, that Old English stone has become stone, or Old English ku has become ko. That is the change in the pronunciation. And this phonetic change, lexical change, morphological change in different levels of the language are natural in any language, no matter what language it is. And English language is not an exception of it. While speaking about the impact, the third question of the history of the English language, that is the fourth question, that is in principles of the Indo-European family, it is worth to mention that the English language of today is an indirect formation in the development of the language. That is to say that English language must have originated, according to the hypothesis, from the Indian language. And Indian people, the people who spoke Indian language, the Sanskrit at one time, migrated from one part of the world to the another part of the world, and as a result of this migration, they appeared different changes in the structure of the languages. And we speak here about the formation and development of new languages. Until the 19th century, scientists believed that the English language, the English language and the languages spoken in Europe had nothing to do in relation with the languages spoken in Asia, on the plateau of Iran and the territories nearby of this plateau. But the investigations proved that the languages spoken in Europe and the languages spoken in Asia had something in common. The investigation analysis proved that different terms had been used for that. First, the term Aryan had been used for the languages spoken in Asia, but when the scientists proved that in the European languages and the Asian language had more common features in their structure, as a result of which the term Aryan had been changed into Indo-Germanic. But later, it is noted that emphasis is given to the term Germanic, and this term had been changed into Indo-European. Now we are using the name Indo-European for the languages spoken in Europe and in part of Asia. These languages include several groups. We pay attention that we are not speaking about the languages. These are groups of languages. That is to say that every group contains several languages in its structure. Indian, Iranian, Armenian, Hellenic, Albanic, Italic, Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Celtic, Hittite, and Tocharian. They are 11. And English language belongs to the Germanic group of languages, which at the same time contains 11 languages. English language is one of them. We mentioned about the provement that the languages spoken in Europe had something in common with the languages spoken in Asia. For the lexical levels, scientists give the example of correspondence between brother and Sanskrit bhrata, brother and frater of the other European languages, that they prove that they have something in common, that made the scientists to bring this language into one family language, and hence they appeared the hypothesis that languages brought into relationship by descent or progressive differentiation from a parent language, they are called family of languages. That was the result of the discoveries of the 20s, beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th century. It's a result of comparative historical method. Let's look at the declension of the verb to be in different languages of Indo-European family. Modern English M is R originated from Old English eon, er is in singular, sindon in plural. And these forms had resemblance in ancient Germanic language, that is the parent language of the other Germanic language, that is Gotik. The resemblance between eon, im, ist, and the other forms of this conjugation, one more time proves that there is a resemblance in the structure of this conjugation of the verb to be, and this, the earliest form of the conjugation of the verb to be, is compared with the other Indo-European, Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. When you look at this conjugation of the verb to be, it's not so difficult to see the resemblance. And this resemblance proves the relationship between these different languages and these languages are united into one group, the so-called Indo-European family of languages. And the next item is about Grimm's law to be discussed at this lecture. And Grimm's law is Grimm's law because of Jacob Grimm discovered, he investigated in the European languages and Germanic languages and Indo-European languages. And he saw some correspondence in the consonants of these languages, that is Germanic and other Indo-European languages. He saw this correspondence, and the regulation of consonant chains is called Grimm's law. Another name for this law is first consonant shift, because shift is the changing of consonants. There's some consonants of Germanic languages corresponds to some consonants of Indo-European languages. And this systematic correspondence, regulation between the consonants of the language is named the first consonant shift, because there is another consonant shift, the second consonant shift, which occurred in the structure of the Germanic languages, in the later development of Germanic languages. But in the previous development of Germanic languages, we may observe the consonant change between Germanic and its predecessors of the other Indo-European languages. So, Jacob Grimm's the examples that Latin piscus or pes corresponds to the words which is found in Germanic language, which starts with the fe. The correspondence pe and fe is given here. Latin piscus or pes corresponds in Germanic languages, in English, fish. Correspondence between pe and fe is observed here. Another example, Latin tres corresponds to English three. Correspondence between the and te. Latin te shifted to the English the. The third one is canton, correspondence between ke of canton and he of Germanic language, 100. So this regulation, according to Grimm's law, is grouped into three groups. That is, pe, te, ke of Indo-European languages corresponds to Germanic fe, the, he correspondingly. In general, we may say that this is correspondence between voiceless plosives and voiced and voiceless fricative, voiceless plosives and voiceless fricatives. Pa, fa, ta, fa, and ka, ha. Voiceless consonants, plosives, corresponds to fricative voiceless consonants. The other group of this Grimm's law includes the correspondence between BDG and PTK, that is, voiced plosives corresponds to voiceless plosives. B into P, D into T, and G into K of Germanic languages. And the third group includes the aspirative consonants to the consonants without aspiration. That is, B, D, G of Indo-European, that is Sanskrit, correspond to B, D, G without aspiration in Germanic languages. Example for that is given Bahratar into brother in Germanic languages. So this regulation is clear, but Karl Werner later found that some consonant chains do not correspond to Grimm's law. In the example canton and 100, Karl Werner noticed that K shifted into he according to Grimm's law, but te is supposed to shift into the in Germanic languages, but in the example canton and 100 we have de instead of te, and Karl Werner explains that this is because of the shifting of the stress from the second syllable into preceding one. When the stress shifted into preceding one, the te is not shifted into the. It is shifted into voiced plosive, that is de. And this regulation is named as Werner's law. That is exception to Grimm's law, that te does not always shift to the. It sometimes shifts into de according to Grimm's law, because of the because of the shifting of the stress into preceding syllable. So that is all about the first lecture. Let me mention one more time. The questions to be mentioned for today is that the language is a cultural subject, and it always, when we explain the linguistic methods, we have to consider that the culture impacts on the development of the language. As for the influences at work on language, the change in the structure of the language does not always concern the outer impacts. Sometimes the change can happen because of the inner development of the languages. And these changes are due to the decay and growth of the language. When we speak about the decay of the language, we say that there is no any change. No one is speaking that language. And this is the subject of the decay of the language. As for the growth, the more people speak the language, the more changes are occurred in the structure of the language. And here we speak about the growth of the language. As for the principle of the Indo-European family of language, it is very important. Why? Because the English language had originated according to the investigation of the scientists, the hypothesis that English language originated from the Indo-European, and it is a part of Indo-European family of languages. That is why we must have clear idea about how the Indo-European languages developed from its earliest period. Discovery of Sanskrit and Grimm's law proves that the English language is a part of Indo-European languages. The conjugation of the verb to be, the resemblance, the correspondence between the consonants of Indo-European languages and the Germanic languages proves that this language had something in common, and they have originated from one and the same root. The self-control questions will help you to understand the lecture, and the lecture is available in internet. Thank you for attention.